if you really want to fix assumption issues in your life, focus on building strong, trusting relationships with your colleagues, because the better you know them, the more solid the relationship, the more trust you've got, the less likelihood that assumption is going to raise its ugly head, because you know the other person, you've taken their measure, you know what they're all about. It's a lot easier to avoid assumption when you know someone.
This is the Leadership Foundry Podcast. I'm your co-host, Brandon Smith, and joining me today is my fellow co-host and co-founder of the Leadership Foundry, Randy Hain. Randy, my friend, how are you today?
Always a good time spent with you, my friend.
Yeah, it's good to catch up and connect. I know we both have had some busy and hectic weeks the past few weeks with travel and other kind of exciting things going on. Good time for us to not only connect, but also to talk about some of the things that we're seeing.
Yes.
Which is a really good segue into our topic today. So our topic for the podcast show today is going to be all about the assumptions we place at work. Mm-hmm. Assumptions about what makes a high performer, assumptions about how we should be operating, assumptions about those people over there and how they're operating. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a really great opportunity for us to test on those a little bit, pull on some friends, and maybe demystify some of those assumptions. So Randy, I know as we were kind of thinking about ideas, this was a great idea that of the many that come from you. So talk to me a little bit about what sparked this for you.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I think every topic we've ever had has come out of our coaching conversations. Over the many years we've done this, it's usually in these incredibly powerful coaching conversations you and I are having every single day. And even though I think assumption's been around a long time, you and I didn't come up with that, it has been on my radar lately. It just seems to be coming up again and again and again. I'll give you one example. I have a senior executive client who is a female leader. She also happens to be the mom of some kids under the age of 10. And she has been running into some assumptions from her colleagues at work that, you know, she's probably not ready or interested in the next level. Nothing could be farther from the truth. She's absolutely committed to growing her career. She's got a great structure at home, supportive spouse. She's got everything she needs to continue to thrive in her career, but assumptions have been made about her ability and willingness to do that. That's just one example of many that I've seen. So this is definitely a very timely topic.
Yeah. So when you think about kind of assumptions, mm-hmm. I know we talked about some categories. When you organize it in your mind, what are some categories you put assumptions into?
You know, I thought about that a little bit, and this is loose, and we could play with it. But I would say there's definitely work practices. There's like some assumptions we make about the way that we work. I think that there are definitely some assumptions around communication style approaches, and then I think there's some interesting assumptions about people and roles. I think I just gave you one example of that when I talked about my client who's a female executive who's also a working mom. So I think that those are the buckets: work practices, communication, and people and roles and kind of their functions. You know, if I were to kind of, you know, lead the train out of the station right now, just get us started, you know, I'll throw some of my most commonly observed assumptions with work practices. Would love to hear your take. So I think one is, and we've talked about this on the show, that long work hours equals dedicated employee. If you put in the hours, 60, 70 hours a week, you're dedicated. And one of the problems with that assumption is we're assuming that people who are efficient and effective, who have good work-life balance or an integrated life that's well organized, that those people are not going to be as dedicated. And that's just crazy. So I think that's assumption number one, that working long hours is the answer. I think another one that I would throw at you is that if we're not hearing feedback from the team, all is well. And you and I both know that's not true. Sometimes people are afraid to speak up. Sometimes people are nervous about, you know, putting their concerns out there on the table to be discussed. So if we don't hear feedback, that does not mean that all is well. And then one more I'll throw at you, and then I'd love to hear your take, is sometimes I think we overvalue tradition over change. We're so focused on that's the way we've always done it. That's the tradition here. That's the way that we've always done things. The problem with that is that stifles innovation, and it keeps you stuck in potentially some old bad habits that do need to change. So that's kind of my big three from the work practices category.
Okay. So I'm going to add some to your list, and it's going to have some work practices, going to have a little bit of communication practices there too.
Sure.
So here's a great work practice one that you and I hear all the time. Well, we need to get on the same page. We need to align. So we need to schedule a meeting.
Oh yeah.
Right. We hear that all the time, right? And everyone listening to this, one of your biggest issues in your working life is going to be meetings. We have too many of them, and the sub assumption is, and the meeting must be 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
So while Randy and I would agree, alignment is really key, and we preach that all the time with our leaders and in the sessions we teach, there are a lot of ways to do it. And sometimes meetings are not always the best solution. Mm-hmm. Particularly if they're poorly run, because then we end up wasting time and then end up having the same meeting over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So that's one. So I'll say that is kind of one. Here I'll offer two more. So if we move into the communication bucket, there's the we often make the assumption that in absence of communication, people assume the worst. All have heard me talk about that for many years. It's a common communication trait. And sometimes it's not true that we should assume the worst. Sometimes the person's just forgotten. It's a reminder for us as leaders not to let long vacuums of communication occur. And then I'll give a third one. It's kind of in that workplace communication, leadership kind of space. I often have leaders tell me, if I am vulnerable or share anything personal about my life, the team isn't going to trust me. It's going to cut into my credibility. They're not going to trust me. In fact, if I'm vulnerable in any way, they're going to see me as weak. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of different kinds of leaders kind of talk about that. They kind of make kind of assumptions again about that. Well, I'm of this gender or I'm of this background, so therefore, if I'm vulnerable, it's going to be bad. Mm-hmm. And actually, we find in the work we do and the research that's out there, the contrary is true. Actually, if we're vulnerable at the right time, it's an invitation, brings people in, and they feel more connected. I had a leader that took over for a company that I was working with, and leader came from another country, and his culture was you do not show any vulnerability, and the entire organization essentially is virtual. And I was talking to members of the organization in this session that I was running, and they said, we just can't connect with him. I mean, he's talking to us on these virtual calls, but he's being so formal and stiff, it feels robotic, like he's just reading off a script. And he actually was reading off a script. Mm-hmm. He said the prior leader we had, it was like, he would do these calls. We'd be like in his kitchen and it just felt like he was bringing us in, and it just felt like a conversation. We felt like we're part of something. So there are assumptions that we make about, the right and wrong ways to operate, and testing those is probably a good, healthy process for us. So Randy, there's three more.
Yeah, I love all of those, especially the one about vulnerability. You and I talk about that so much. I think the best leaders I know are vulnerable. Vulnerability is a superpower if used appropriately. I'll just throw a few more at you, and then if you've got any more, we can kind of land the plane on these best practices or biggest assumptions. But I think I've got a few more in communication and maybe a couple in what I call people and roles. So when it comes to communication, we deal with this a lot in our session that we do on practical clarity. You've heard me talk about this one. So assuming shared knowledge, where we assume that everyone's got all of the same information at exactly the same time. Quite frankly, that is the assumption, but I've almost never seen that actually play out. So I think that teams often assume everyone's got the same, sheet of data, the same, scorecard. We don't typically. Another one, and this is one of my personal favorites, and it's something that I work very hard to eliminate, is we often assume shared expectations. Brandon, how often have we heard our clients say something like, we've got to get sales up. We've got to fix the sales problem. And everybody leaves the meeting all going in completely different directions. Chaos ensues. Nobody knows exactly what it means to fix the sales problems. So when we are leaders and we're communicating to our teams, our peers, to anybody, we've got to clarify expectations because we often assume that people know exactly what we mean when we say, go fix it. Another one, maybe not as common, is unspoken email etiquette. I find this humorous because I am notorious for short emails. Brandon, you can send me a 7-paragraph email that's incredibly riveting, really great information. And you know me, you've known me for 20 years. I am going to respond with, hey, Brandon, that sounds great. Thanks a lot. Talk soon. I just don't write long emails, but people often will call me or reach out and say, are you upset? Because there's an assumption that a short email is negative. So that's a funny one for me because I run into it all the time. A couple more that are more people related. Have you noticed that sometimes we make assumptions that creative people are probably going to be disorganized, or remote workers are typically not going to be as productive? Those are erroneous assumptions that are just out there. I think people assume that about those two particular categories. And then one more, and this is a little close to home because I'm a high-functioning introvert, is you often hear that, well, introverted, quiet people lack ambition. They're probably not looking to grow their careers or be in leadership roles someday. And it's the complete opposite. They're just as ambitious as anyone. They may express themselves differently and pursue it differently. But these are just some of the ones that I am seeing daily and weekly. I loved your list. Is there anything else you would add to this nice list that we're accumulating here?
Yeah, I would add a few more, Randy. So these are more individually focused.
Yeah.
So I often hear people say, look, if I just put my head down and do good work,
yeah,
I don't need to show off my work or platform the work I'm doing. If I just do good work, people will find me. I'll get promoted. That's an assumption we make. That's actually not true. Randy and I have seen that not to be true. If you do good work, you could get overlooked. So it's important that we do let folks know the work that we're doing. We do let folks know the contribution we're making. We often assume leaders are aware of all the things on our plate. They rarely are. Even if it's your direct leader, you think, oh yeah, my direct leader knows exactly all the activities I've got going on and my team and I have. No, I can promise you they may have once talked to you about it and since then they've forgotten because they're thinking about all the activities on their plate. So we need to remind them of that. So I think that's one. The second other assumption that you and I hear a lot, Randy, is, managing politics, that's kind of a waste of time. Like I don't really want to get involved in politics and aligning with other leaders. I got work to do. That's a waste of time. Again, not a good assumption at all. That's going to be a career limiting assumption because once we hit director level, that's where politics start. We've got to make sure we're spending time aligning with other leaders to our left and to our right and making sure we're on the same page. And if we don't do that, we're going to get passed over and we're not going to get really seen for the good work that we do. And we're not going to really get a chance to support other leaders in the business. And then the last one, Randy, that I know is probably near and dear to your heart. I don't have time to have lunch, let alone have lunch with a colleague. We are too busy around here. That is a waste of time. I'm just going to do an eating. I'm just going to do a working lunch, eat at my desk, kind of get stuff done. And you all heard Randy's little scoff and chuckle at that because that's a huge missed opportunity. That's where we build some of those most powerful alignment relationships with our colleagues, maybe even direct reports. Others is just by having an opportunity to share a meal with them, and particularly if you get to go kind of quote unquote off campus. The conversation opens up. You get to know them a little bit more as a person. A really, really great way to do that. The last one I would also say is this is an assumption that's come out a little more recently that is important that Ray and I just anchor it in the right way. There is the assumption right now that, look, I can be just as productive and move just as productively and efficiently up the organizational ladder working from home than I can working in the office. That's not completely true. While we can get a lot of good work done, the relationships, which is kind of the theme of this set of assumptions that I'm sharing, the relationships we build with others face to face are critical to not only building trust, but also getting those opportunities. Most organizations, when an opportunity suddenly emerges, they don't have some really robust spreadsheet with metrics that kind of, rates everybody on 5-point scale, and they run it through an Excel spreadsheet and it spits out, this is the person next up for that role. That's not how organizations operate. That's not how leaders operate. They go, well, who do you think would be good for this? And the person we think of is the person who is top of mind, which is often the person we just saw about 10 minutes ago.
Right.
So the more that we can get that face time, that's an important complement to also making sure we're doing good work. So don't dismiss completely working in an office. If you work 100% remote, unless the entire organization is remote, the folks that are going to get that face time, they're going to be set up for more promotion opportunities than the folks working remotely. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of need to be aware of some of those assumptions we place on things that don't seem to have direct lines to performance, which actually have really big impacts on our career. So mm-hmm. I would throw out that category, Randy.
So the only thing I've got left in this lengthy but really interesting list is I'm going to piggyback on something you said, because I loved when you talked about that don't assume that people know your good work. I want to take that a little further. Don't assume as a teammate, whatever level you are in the company, that your development, your growth is in the hands of other people. Mm-hmm. You've got to own your own development and your own growth. So instead of waiting for your boss or human resources to knock on your door and say, hey, I've got your development plan, we've got a path for you to the next level, you should be owning that. So I find sometimes that we sit back and wait, assuming that others will come to us with that plan, that they'll invest in us. We need to own it. We need to come up with our own plans, our own resources. Absolutely, we want to seek help. We want to get others involved in that, but let's not assume that other people should care more about our development than we do. So that's the only thing I would just add as another layer to something you said. It might be interesting, Brandon, I think, because we're kind of running into our last segment here. What if we volley back and forth on some of the best practices to overcome assumption? If this works for you, how about if I lobby one to you, I'll share one, and then you lobby one back to me, and we'll go back and forth till we get to our list.
My favorite. You might pick my favorite. You better not pick my favorite, Randy.
Well, I'm actually, I think I probably will. We'll probably cross over a little bit, but I'm going to begin with something that is often overlooked. So best practice number one to overcome assumption: slow down and be thoughtful. And I'll tell you why I say that, because so much of assumption comes from our busyness. We're in a hurry. We don't take the time to size up our audience. We're not thinking enough about the other person. We're certainly not getting into what we'll talk about in a minute, which I'm sure is asking questions. But slow down enough to give yourself time and space to avoid assumption. So I'm going to start with that really basic foundational layer. That's my first best practice.
I think that's a great one. And you didn't take my one I was going to use, but you hinted at it, actually. So you knew. So one of the assumptions we often make is, this happens in meetings all the time. We're in a meeting where, let's say it's a skip level meeting. So it's got, us plus our leaders in it. The senior leader talks about something they want us to go do. Everyone nods their head. No one is understanding at all what they're talking about, but we're all nodding our head yes, because there's the assumption, if I ask a question, I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm doing. The senior leader is going to get really angry with me. I'm probably going to get fired. So just nod my head yes, and then leave the meeting and then go have a bunch of post calls with all my colleagues to say, did you understand any of that? I didn't understand any of that. What are you going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do.
Right.
So let's don't do that. The best practice is always drive clarity. Workplace dysfunction. If you want an antidote to any kind of workplace dysfunction, whether we don't understand a messaging, we've got a narcissist on our hands, we've got someone who doesn't understand boundaries, drive clarity. And so we drive clarity by asking questions. So ask questions up and down. So in this case, ask questions in those meetings. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. Here's what I heard. Is that what you were intending to message? Did I track that properly? Just play back what you heard is a nice way to ensure understanding, because we don't have any time for guessing. So asking questions and driving that clarity up is important. Do the same thing down with your teams when you're the senior leader. So team, you heard me talk for the last 30 minutes about where we're going and why. Does that make sense to everybody? But most importantly, what did you hear? Get them to play back what they heard. If you just stop with, did that make sense to everybody? They're going to fall into that assumption trap I just laid out. They're going to nod their head. Yes, I understand. They don't understand. So make sure that they play back. So then you get a chance to say, that's exactly what I meant. Or that's not quite what I meant. My apologies. I meant something like this. So driving that level of clarity, asking those questions. But again, our underlying assumption is rooted in fear, because asking questions is a form of vulnerability. They're going to think I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to wonder why I'm in the room. We have all those assumptions we place in our mind, which actually creates an incredible amount of inefficient work. So if you want to drive more efficiency, drive clarity, ask questions. So that would be my best practice I would throw into the stew, Randy.
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit and add a slight addendum to what you said, because I love everything you said, totally agree with everything. And if I were to maybe look at asking questions through the lens of people interactions. So I love what you addressed. It's the most common form of it. But let's say that we're superimposing our assumption on other people. Well, Brandon is not much of a dessert eater, so I'm not going to invite him to this after-hour cupcake event with all the senior leaders. He doesn't like dessert. He probably wouldn't want to go to that, right? So something silly as that. Or maybe it's, like, Mike has never actually, raised his hand to do anything that shows leadership or volunteer. So I'm not even going to go to him and talk to him about this possible promotion. He probably isn't interested in that. So what I'm getting at is asking questions rather than superimposing your beliefs, your expectations on somebody else. So that's just another way to think about, instead of assuming that about Mike, I should go ask him. Instead of assuming Brandon doesn't want to go to our cupcake event, I'm going to go and ask him if he'd like to go. So there's just another dimension of asking questions that just goes in a different direction. My second best practice is very simple, because it's a beautiful follow-up to asking questions. Actively listen, for Pete's sake. Listen to understand. Don't listen until it's our turn to speak. And there's a huge difference, because what happens when we're busy and we're moving at light speed and we're under a lot of pressure, we're just trying to get to the next thing. Okay, are you done yet? Because I want to talk now. Instead of, what did I just hear you say? Your point about, let me repeat back to you what I just heard. Can we clarify what we're talking about here? So active listening is listening, but making sure that we've got a deeper understanding. So that's my second big best practice.
Yeah. So I think we're getting close to rounding the corner on our assumption conversation here today. I've got another one for us.
Okay.
So when we are in the workplace, we often assume my boss is thinking about me. My boss is thinking about me. My boss is kind of worried about me and the team. My boss is thinking about all the work I've got on the plate this week. My boss is thinking about how she or he can support me. They're spending a lot of time thinking about me. And then when they don't ask how you're doing or give you resources and you get mad, why aren't they thinking about me? And so that's an assumption we make that is actually not true. We all are in the customer service business. We all have customers. Your boss's customer is not you. Your boss's customer is their boss. They're thinking about their boss. And their boss is not thinking about them. So their boss is thinking about their boss, which might be the board of directors. It could be the street and analysts. They're thinking somewhere else. So when we sit back and wait for our leader to come to us and offer us support or ask for help, and then they don't, we silently punish them. That's not good. So one of the best things we can do is lean into that. View your boss as your number one customer, because they are. So get curious, ask questions. What can I be doing to help you? What can I be doing to support you? If you need resources, share that with them. I'm happy to do this in order to help you out here. All I need is the following resources. I had a client I was working with some years ago who was in a fairly large consulting firm. So he had spent his career working with clients and doing that client-facing work. He knows how to do this. And it's funny because so often we know how to do this. We have the skills. We do it with our customers. We go inside our organization and we just drop all those competencies. We don't use them. And he was second in the ranks in this consulting firm. So they had managing directors. He was like vice president. He was right below that. Okay. So a senior person. And his managing director that he reported to, there was several of them, he said, we just have never really gotten along. I don't feel supported by my leader at all. And he was really frustrated. He was falling into this assumption trap that I'm talking about. And I said, well, you know what? I want you to try something. In the next meeting you have with your leader, I don't want you to view them as your leader. I want you to view them as if they're one of your clients. I want you to take that whole meeting and treat it like it's a client meeting. Ask questions, get curious, outline your recommendations, do everything as if they're a client. So he's like, all right, I'll try it. What do I have to lose? So he did that. He calls me back after the meeting and he says, went completely different than I expected. When we finished the meeting, my boss, the managing director, said to me, this was the best meeting I've probably had in 6 weeks. I felt like a client today. So just doing that simple pivot, and rather than assuming your leader's thinking about you, making them your customer and think about them and think about ways you can help them is not only going to help you prevent you from getting frustrated, it's going to help you be so much more effective in understanding the needs of the business, understanding their needs, meeting those needs, and ultimately it's going to benefit you in your career. So that's another assumption I would lay out. We often assume our leaders are thinking about us. They're not really. We need to be thinking about them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Love that. Love that. I know as we're getting kind of close to landing the plane here, I'm going to throw some out that probably don't need a lengthy unpacking or explanation, but just some things to think about. Another best practice is focus on the facts. Don't rely on beliefs and emotions and your intuition. Go for the facts. Wherever you can get data, let data support your assumption. Don't let it be driven by just a gut feeling. You've got to be careful with that. Another one, and this is something that gets all of us in trouble, we all need to practice assuming good intent more often. Sometimes assumptions start out with, oh, well, I'm assuming you're out to get me, or I think that there's a problem here, and you didn't respond to my email right away, so I assume that you don't like me, or whatever it is. I saw a funny meme the other day that talked about the older gentleman in front of you in the Buick driving the car really slowly. Before you get upset, he may have his grandkid's birthday cake in the back seat, and he's just trying to be careful. So again, instead of going to the dark side immediately with assumption, maybe we could assume good intent. And then I'll end my best practices ramble with this. And you alluded to this earlier, Brandon, I want to bring it back up again. If you really want to fix assumption issues in your life, focus on building strong, trusting relationships with your colleagues, because the better you know them, the more solid the relationship, the more trust you've got, the less likelihood that assumption is going to raise its ugly head, because you know the other person, you've taken their measure, you know what they're all about. It's a lot easier to avoid assumption when you know someone. So to Brandon's point earlier, really work on your relationships. That's going to really bring down the issue of assumption. So that's my list.
Okay, I'll add a few more, Randy, and then we will land the plane. So I taught a course a few weeks ago, not too long ago, on public speaking. And we generally don't like public speaking. It's not something that all of us love. And no matter what your fear of public speaking is, you're always thinking in the back of your mind, what's the audience going to do to me? And then your unique answer to that has a lot to do with your history. They're going to reject me. They're going to laugh at me. They're going to say this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And we hold on to those assumptions when we go in and we're presenting to senior leaders. So do you really think senior leaders want to see you fail in front of them? I don't think so. You're on their team. They want nothing more than for you to deliver a great presentation, which helps them lead the business more effectively. They're not rooting for your disaster. They're rooting for your amazing triumph and success, because your triumph and success means they're going to be helped. So I think that's one assumption that we hold on to. Another kind of final assumption that we place is we make this is just human nature. It's because it falls into the realm of cognitive psychology. The world's way too noisy, and the way we process it is by putting people in boxes and schemas. In other words, when we see a person, we make a whole lot of assumptions based on how they look.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're young, they're in their 20s, they're not going to have a good idea to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. They haven't been around long enough. They're an older guy like me with white hair. They must be mean and grumpy and not sensitive or caring, or whatever it happens to be. We place assumptions based on the way people look without actually ever asking them questions or learning about themselves. I can't tell you how many times when I've shared my story and my personal story and journey and some of the challenges that I've gone through as a human, people will come up to me and they'll say things like, and this is meant to be a compliment, but it ties into what we're talking about. They'll say, "Wow, you're a real person." Yeah, I kind of am. Mm-hmm. So we don't always get to choose the shell that we live in, that we were brought into, but underneath that is a real person. So don't make, if you can, check your assumptions when you look at somebody and how they appear. Mm-hmm. They may not actually match up with the assumption that you make about them. Mm-hmm. You won't know until you ask. So ask that junior colleague for thoughts and ideas on how to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. Give that senior leader the benefit of the doubt versus kind of layering on all your beliefs about someone who looks that way. Mm-hmm. So just some more thoughts around assumptions.
Yeah, just one of the things I would just encourage everybody to do as you've listened to this today is think about how you're going to take, even bits and pieces of what Brandon and I share today and start to integrate it into your approach. If you truly want to get rid of some of the assumption in your life, take 1 or 2 or 3 of these best practices and just make it your own. One of the things that I would encourage all of you to do who's listening is look at your calendar every day and, do 2 things. 1, reflect on yesterday and think about, how did I do in the area of assumption yesterday? How did I do? Did I make assumptions that were wrong? Could I have gotten better? How did I show up in that area of assumption? But then more importantly, today, here's my calendar. How am I going to plan to do a better job in the area of assumption today using some of the best practices that we've given you? So that's a super practical way for you to integrate improvement in assumption into your daily life.
I love that. I think I'm not going to add anything more than what Randy said. If you need to, go back and re-listen to the last 30 seconds because he summed it up so well, practical things you can do. And with all of our Leadership Foundry podcasts, the goal is always, what can you take away, the one thing from this call today, this podcast today, that you can integrate into your life and world so you and your team can be thriving that much more effectively starting tomorrow.